The year is 1683. Across the plains of Hungary, the earth trembles beneath the weight of empire. 150,000 men march west. An army so vast it takes 3 hours for its columns to pass a single point. The crescent banners of the Ottoman Sultan blot out the summer sky, and leading them is Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, commander of the most feared army on earth. He has carved a bloody path through the Balkans, leaving conquered cities smoking in his wake. Now he turns his gaze toward Vienna, the golden apple of Europe. If Vienna falls, the road to Germany lies open. If Vienna falls, Italy trembles. If Vienna falls, the fractured kingdoms of Christendom collapse like dominoes. The Sultan has promised Mustafa this golden apple, the ancient symbol of world dominion. And if he delivers this final jewel, the map of the world changes forever. Europe knows what is coming. Yet Europe does nothing. The Holy Roman Empire is weak, divided by politics and pride. Its emperor has already fled Vienna, abandoning his own capital to save his skin. France watches from the shadows, unwilling to help its rival Austria. The Italian states bicker among themselves, more concerned with trade routes than survival. Protestant and Catholic still nurse wounds from wars that tore the continent apart just decades before. The great powers see only their own interests. None see the abyss opening beneath their feet. None understand that when Vienna falls, they all fall with it. Only one man believes the darkness can be stopped. King John III Sobieski of Poland. He is 60 years old, a warrior since youth, a veteran of 30 battles against Turk and Tatar alike, a man of faith so deep it shapes every decision he makes. Where others see despair, he sees duty. Where others see impossible odds, he sees the hand of providence calling him to stand. His kingdom is exhausted, his treasury empty, his army numbers only a few thousand. But his faith burns brighter than the sun over the Carpathian mountains. He sends word to Vienna. "Hold, I am coming." He does not ask permission from other kings. He does not wait for promises of payment or political alliances. He simply gathers every man who can ride and begins the longest forced march in Polish history. Because Jan Sobieski understands that some moments transcend calculation, that when civilization stands at the precipice, good men do not count the cost. They pay it, and the price, he knows, will be written in blood. By mid-July, the Ottoman host surrounds Vienna, 150,000 against 15,000 defenders. The disparity is not just numerical. It is psychological. The walls of Vienna are old, built in an era before gunpowder could shatter stone like glass. The garrison is small, commanded by Count Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg, a man of iron will who knows they cannot win. Yet he refuses to surrender. He refuses because surrender means death, not just for soldiers, but for every man, woman, and child sheltering behind these crumbling walls. The siege engines begin their work. Day and night, the cannons roar. Ottoman miners dig beneath the walls, planting barrels of gunpowder in tunnels that snake through the earth like veins of death. When the charges blow, entire sections of wall collapse in eruptions of fire and smoke. The defenders fight for every yard of wall, every hour of daylight. Inside the city, time becomes measured in heartbeats and prayers. Kara Mustafa sits in his silk pavilion, dining on lamb and honey, while Vienna starves. He builds a city of tents so vast it takes an hour to walk from end to end. He invites foreign ambassadors to watch the siege as theater, a spectacle of Ottoman power. He is patient. He has already won, or so he believes. Time and hunger are his allies. His officers urge a direct assault, take the city by storm, end this quickly. But Mustafa refuses. Why sacrifice men when starvation will do the work? He does not look north. He does not imagine anyone would be foolish enough to challenge him. All of Europe watches the horizon burn and believes Vienna will fall. The question is not if, only when. Merchants in Amsterdam place bets on the date. Princes in distant courts prepare for a world where the Ottoman crescent flies over half the continent. The fall of Vienna seems inevitable, written in the stars, decided by fate itself. The city is dying by inches. Smoke hangs over Vienna like a funeral shroud. The streets are silent except for distant cannon fire and the screams of the wounded. Food runs low, then lower, then nearly gone. People boil leather belts to make soup. Rats become delicacies traded like gold. The very old and very young die first, not from Ottoman steel, but from hunger. Their bodies are buried in mass graves dug in public squares because there is no time, no strength for proper funerals. Water runs even lower. The Danube is blockaded, wells run dry, disease spreads through the crowded streets like wildfire. Dysentery, fever, wounds that will not heal because bodies too weak from starvation cannot fight infection, yet still they fight. Civilians dig trenches beside soldiers. Old men stand watch on the walls with muskets they can barely lift. Young boys carry stones to repair breaches, their small hands bleeding from the work. Women load weapons with steady hands, having learned in weeks what takes soldiers years to master. Every morning, Count Kahlenberg climbs the ramparts and counts the breaches. Every morning, there are more. The Ottomans have blown 3 massive holes in the outer defenses. The bastions that once seemed impregnable now look like broken teeth in an old man's jaw. The defenders are down to 4,000 fighting men. They have held for 2 months. They cannot hold much longer. Kahlenberg writes in his journal words that reveal the truth behind the heroism. We are living ghosts defending a tomb, yet we will not yield. Outside the walls, Kara Mustafa grows more arrogant. Merchants set up bazaars between the tents, selling silk and spices as if this were a festival. Musicians play in the evenings. He has already divided Vienna's wealth in his mind, deciding which treasures will go to the Sultan, which will fill his own coffers. He plans the victory parade through Constantinople. He imagines the Sultan's gratitude, perhaps even a promotion. He dreams of pushing further west, of adding his name to the list of conquerors who changed the world. But something shifts in the north. Far beyond the Ottoman lines, beyond the horizon Mustafa does not bother watching, an army gathers. It is pitifully small by the standards of empires, but it moves with purpose. King John Sobieski has called every ally who will answer. Duke Charles of Lorraine with 20,000 Austrian and German troops. The southern German princes contribute a few thousand more. Bavaria sends its best. Saxony sends what it can spare. Franconia rallies to the call. And from Poland, across 500 miles of mountain and storm, Sobieski leads his winged hussars south. 3,000 Polish cavalry. The finest heavy cavalry Europe has ever produced. Knights armored in steel that costs more than a peasant will earn in 10 lifetimes. Each suit of armor is a masterpiece. Articulated plates that move with the body, proof against sword and arrow, proof against everything except the heaviest firearms at close range. They are not enough. Even joined with the imperial forces, they will field barely 27,000 men against 80,000 Ottomans still capable of fighting after leaving forces to maintain the siege. The numbers are madness, suicide dressed in military planning. Any reasonable commander would wait for more reinforcements, would negotiate, would find some other solution that does not involve charging headlong into an army 3 times your size. Sobieski does not care about numbers. He cares about duty. He cares that Vienna is dying. He cares that if Vienna falls, Poland falls next, and after Poland, there is nothing between the Ottoman tide and the Baltic Sea. He writes to his beloved wife Maria, the woman who has been his strength through 3 decades of war. The letter is found among his papers after the battle, stained with dirt and rain from the march south. I go to save Vienna. If I perish there, remember me to our children, and tell them their father died doing what God demanded. Not what was safe, not what was profitable, what God demanded. Inside the city, as August bleeds into September, despair settles like frost on a winter morning. The walls crumble faster than they can be repaired. The powder stores are nearly empty. Every cannon shot now has to be carefully rationed. The Ottoman mines are nearly complete. Engineers report that the enemy tunnels are within feet of the final defensive positions. When those mines blow, there will be nothing left to defend. Kahlenberg sends his last messenger through enemy lines on the night of September 9th with a simple message: come now, or do not come at all. We have days, perhaps hours. On the night of September 10th, a rumor spreads through Vienna like wildfire. A sentry swears he saw signal fires on the distant hills. Another claims to have heard trumpets echoing from the mountains, though surely that is impossible at such distance. The people gather on the walls, straining their eyes toward the north. They have been disappointed so many times, promised relief that never came, told to hold just one more day, one more week. They do not dare to hope, and yet they cannot stop themselves from hoping. And there, just before dawn on September 11th, they see it, banners, thousands of them, cresting the hills of Kahlenberg, the double-headed eagle of the Holy Roman Empire, the white eagle of Poland, the standards of Bavaria, Saxony, Franconia, colors they thought they would never see. The relief army has arrived. Inside Vienna, church bells ring for the first time in weeks. The sound is thin, weak, because the bell ringers themselves are weak from starvation. But the sound carries. People weep openly in the streets. They do not know if this small force can save them, but for the first time in 2 months, they believe they might not die alone. A whisper spreads through every street, every home, every heart too weary to beat strongly anymore. The Polish king is coming. The Winged Hussars are coming. And suddenly, impossibly, the people of Vienna find the strength to stand one more day. The march south was a prayer written in iron and will. King John Sobieski led his men across 500 miles of wilderness, through Carpathian passes where summer storms turned trails into rivers of mud, through forests so thick the sun vanished for days, across rivers swollen with rain that swept away supply wagons and drowned pack horses. They moved faster than any army in history. 40 miles some days, 50 when desperation pushed them. They slept in their saddles. They ate in the saddle, dried meat and hard bread consumed without stopping, because Vienna was dying and every hour mattered. The Hussars rode at the vanguard, those legendary knights who had become myth even while they still lived, warriors clad in armor that gleamed like captured sunlight. Wings of eagle feathers rose from their backs, mounted on wooden frames, not decoration, but weapons of psychological warfare perfected over generations. The wings made them appear larger than life, and the sound, that eerie whistling roar when 3,000 hussars rode at full charge, was the last thing countless enemies ever heard. A sound like the world ending, like judgment descending from heaven. Each hussar was a lord of war, armored head to foot in plate and mail, carrying an 18-foot lance of hollow wood, light enough to couch under one arm yet strong enough to punch through a man and his horse together. Behind the lance, a saber curved in the Eastern style, balanced for cutting from horseback. Behind the saber, a pair of pistols, though these were considered almost insulting to use. A hussar's honor was measured by lance and blade. They were nobility. They owned lands. They had servants and titles and wealth. Any one of them could have stayed home in safety while lesser men went to die. They rode to Vienna anyway because honor demanded it, because their king called, because some things matter more than survival. They were the last true knights of Europe, and they rode to die as knights should die, in defense of something greater than themselves. At Tulln, the Polish king joined forces with Duke Charles of Lorraine and the imperial army. The meeting is recorded in multiple accounts. Poles and Austrians, who had no love for each other, who had fought border wars within living memory, now stood shoulder to shoulder. Catholic and Protestant soldiers who should have been enemies, whose fathers had killed each other in the 30 Years' War, recognized each other as brothers, because Vienna was dying. And if Vienna fell, they would all die in turn. Faith and survival bound them. Old hatreds dissolved in the face of a greater threat. Nothing else mattered except the charge they knew was coming. On the night of September 11th, the Allied army reached the Vienna woods. They made camp among the trees. No fires, no noise above a whisper. Ottoman scouts were everywhere. Any sign of the army's presence would give Mustafa time to redeploy, to turn his vast force around, and meet them on ground of his choosing. The element of surprise was all they had. Surprise and courage and faith. Against 80,000, that would have to be enough. At dawn on September 12th, the commanders climbed to the summit of Kahlenberg. What they saw below stole the breath from their lungs. The Ottoman camp stretched for miles, 80,000 men in perfect formation, cavalry reserves in the tens of thousands, artillery parks, bristling with bronze cannon that gleamed in the morning sun. The crescent banners so numerous they looked like a second sky. Supply trains that could feed this army for months. Between the mountain and the city lay open ground, kill zones watched by Ottoman guns. Even Sobieski, who had seen every kind of battlefield, who had fought in marshes and forests and open plains, felt the weight of what they faced. 27,000 against 80,000 of the finest soldiers the Ottoman Empire could field. Janissaries who had never known defeat. Sipahi cavalry who had conquered from the Persian Gulf to the gates of Vienna. Artillery crews, trained in the best schools of war. This was not a rabble. This was the army that had crushed every opponent it had ever faced. A younger commander might have hesitated, might have waited for better odds, might have sent word back to request more men, more time, more of something that would make this suicide mission slightly less suicidal. But Jan Sobieski understood something the Ottomans did not. That some moments in history demand sacrifice without calculation. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear make your choices. That when evil masses at the gates, good men do not ask for better odds. They simply pay the price that virtue demands. He turned to his officers. His voice was calm, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. The words are recorded by multiple witnesses. Gentlemen, we will attack at noon. The Hussars will lead. Make your peace with God. Across the Allied lines, men knelt in prayer. Catholic priests offered blessings, moving from soldier to soldier with holy water and words of comfort. Protestant chaplains led hymns in German dialects that should have been foreign to Polish ears. But today every word was understood. For one morning, there was no divide between them. They were simply Christians, facing the shadow. Simply men who had chosen to stand when standing meant death. The Hussars checked their armor one last time, tightened girths on their war horses, tested lance balance, feeling for the perfect point where 18 feet of hollow wood became an extension of the arm, spoke quietly to their horses in Polish, in the language of home, because horses know their riders' hearts, and these horses would need to be as brave as the men on their backs. Some wrote final letters home, scratching out words on scraps of paper with shaking hands, trying to say everything that needs saying when you know you have only minutes left. Others simply closed their eyes and breathed, memorizing the smell of morning air, the feel of wind on their faces, storing up sensations for whatever comes after. At 1100 hours, the army began its descent from Kahlenberg. First, the infantry, engaging the Ottoman skirmishers who had been watching the woods all night without understanding what waited in those trees. Then the German cavalry, hammering at the flanks in coordinated charges meant to draw Ottoman attention, to pull reserves away from the center. The Austrians pressed from the south, pushing toward the city, trying to link up with the desperate defenders inside the walls. It was working, but slowly, too slowly. Vienna could not wait for a methodical victory. Vienna could not wait for careful tactics and measured advances. Inside the city, the defenders were making a final sortie, throwing themselves against the siege lines in one last desperate push. Starhemberg had gathered every man who could still walk, armed them with whatever weapons remained, and sent them out to die if that is what it took. If the cavalry did not break through soon, the city would fall anyway. The sortie would be slaughtered. The walls would be overrun. Everything would end in the next few hours regardless of what happened on the slopes of Kahlenberg. King Sobieski sat atop his war horse at the crest of a low ridge. Behind him, 3,000 winged hussars formed into a massive wedge, the classic formation used by cavalry for millennia because nothing in war has ever improved on the simple geometry of the wedge. Concentrate all force at a single point. Hit the enemy line hard enough to break it. Pour through the gap before it can close. It sounds simple. It requires absolute discipline. One rider breaking formation ruins everything. One horse stumbling creates a cascade of disaster. The wedge works only if every man trusts the man beside him completely. The hussars had that trust. They had trained together, fought together, bled together for years, some for decades. 3,000 lances, lowered as one. The movement was precise, practiced, beautiful in its lethal perfection. 3,000 prayers whispered into the wind, words in Polish that God surely understood, regardless of language. Our Father who art in heaven, Hail Mary full of grace, guard me this day, keep my lance true, give me courage, help me die well. His sons rode beside him, Alexander and James, both of them warriors in their own right, both knowing their father would lead from the front, because that is what kings do. The king raised his saber high, the blade catching sunlight, throwing light across the formation like a signal from heaven itself. And the thunder began. At noon, on September 12, 1683, the heavens opened, not with rain, not with lightning, with wings. 3,000 Polish hussars launched from the ridge like a hammer thrown by the hand of God himself. They started at a trot, the ground beginning to shake under thousands of hooves, moving in perfect rhythm. Then a canter, the rhythm building, the sound rising. The feathered wings on their backs caught the wind and roared, a sound like 1,000 eagles diving at once, a sound that carried for miles, a sound the Ottomans had never heard before. And then they charged. 18,000 Allied cavalry followed in their wake, Germans and Austrians and smaller contingents from every corner of the Holy Roman Empire. But it was the hussars who led. It was the hussars the enemy saw first, coming down the slope like an avalanche of steel and fury. The largest cavalry charge in human history descended on the Ottoman lines like the wrath of ages, like every righteous battle ever fought, condensed into one perfect moment of violence and faith. From the walls of Vienna, the defenders watched in stunned silence. They had never seen anything like it. A living avalanche pouring down the slopes in perfect formation, wings flashing in the afternoon sun, like angels descending to judgment. The sound carried even over the roar of cannon, even over the screams of dying men in the streets. They heard the thunder, and for the first time in 2 months, they dared to believe. The Ottoman cavalry moved to intercept. Thousands of Sipahi riders, the finest horsemen of the East, veterans of 100 campaigns who had ridden down Persian lancers and Egyptian Mamluks and Russian boyars. They formed lines. They leveled their weapons. They prepared to meet the charge with the confidence of men who had never been broken. They had never faced the winged hussars before. They lasted 4 minutes. The Polish wedge hit the Ottoman line with the force of a collapsing mountain. The impact was audible even from the walls of Vienna, a thunderclap of steel on steel. 18-foot lances shattered against Ottoman cavalry, throwing men from saddles, punching through armor, impaling horses and riders together. The hussars did not slow. They punched through the first rank, then the second, then the third. Every lance that shattered, the rider discarded, drew his saber, kept riding, kept killing. The momentum carried them forward like an unstoppable tide. Behind them, the Allied cavalry widened the breach. German cavalry hit the flanks. Austrian cuirassiers drove deep into Ottoman formations. The Ottoman formation began to crack. First one unit broke and fled, then another. Then an entire regiment turned to run. Then it shattered entirely. Panic spread faster than any sword. Ottoman soldiers who had stood firm against sieges and storms, and every kind of horror that war can offer, turned and ran. Units that had never retreated, whose banners bore the marks of 50 victories, fled in chaos. The Janissaries tried to form defensive squares. Elite infantry, the Sultan's personal troops, men who had been taken as boys and raised as weapons. They had never known defeat. They did not know defeat now either, because defeat implies survival. The hussars rode them down like wheat before a scythe. Sabers rising and falling with mechanical precision, horses trampling men who had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, because the cavalry was everywhere at once. King Sobieski was in the thick of it, his warhorse covered in blood, his saber red to the hilt, his voice rising above the chaos. Forward, for Christ, for Vienna. His sons beside him fighting like the princes they were born to be. He led from the front, because that is what kings do when the world is ending, because courage demands to be seen, because men will follow where their king leads, but only if he leads from the front where death waits the same for kings as for common soldiers. Kara Mustafa watched his army disintegrate from his silk pavilion. The man who had promised his sultan the conquest of Europe stood frozen as the nightmare unfolded. His officers screamed for orders. His guards begged him to flee. He watched the hussars coming closer, those winged demons that seemed to multiply with every passing moment. Finally, when the hussars were visible in the distance, close enough that he could see individual riders, he ran. He left behind his treasure, chests of gold and jewels meant to bribe European nobles. He left his maps, detailed plans for the conquest of Germany and Italy. He left his personal banner, the one that had flown over every victory of his career. He left the golden apple, the symbol meant for the Sultan's hand, the prize that was supposed to represent the submission of Europe. All of it abandoned in a mad scramble to escape the fury of the Winged Hussars. By nightfall, it was over. 80,000 Ottoman soldiers scattered to the winds, 15,000 dead on the field, their bodies carpeting the ground so thick in places you could walk 100 yards without touching grass. The rest fleeing south in complete chaos, abandoning weapons and supplies and comrades too wounded to run. The greatest army the Sultan had ever assembled, an army that had conquered kingdoms and ended dynasties, destroyed in a single afternoon by a force 1/3 its size. Vienna was saved. Europe was saved. The tide of history, which had seemed unstoppable just days before, had turned on one September afternoon, and the sound that turned it was thunder, the thunder of hooves pounding down a mountain, the thunder of wings singing in the wind, the thunder of men who refused to let darkness win. At sunset, King John Sobieski rode through the gates of Vienna. The streets were lined with people weeping, cheering, falling to their knees. Children reached out to touch his horse, as if contact with the animal could transfer some of that divine luck, that impossible victory. Women threw flowers, though where they found flowers in a starving city no one knows. Men kissed the hooves of the hussar mounts. They looked like ghosts, hollow-eyed from starvation, gaunt from disease, their clothes hanging off bodies that had lost half their weight. But they were alive. The king dismounted in the cathedral square, covered in dust and blood, and exhaustion beyond measure. His armor was dented. His face was lined with fatigue that went deeper than physical tiredness. He had ridden 500 miles and fought the battle of his life in a single day. He was 60 years old and had just saved civilization. He knelt before the altar of St. Stephen's Cathedral and spoke the words that would echo through history. Words recorded by priests and soldiers and citizens who were there to witness. Veni, vidi, Deus vicit. I came, I saw, God conquered, not we conquered, not I conquered, not Poland or Austria or Germany conquered. God conquered. Because Jan Sobieski understood what some men forget in the fever of victory. That courage is a gift from heaven, that strength is borrowed from sources beyond flesh. That when the impossible becomes possible, it is not by human hands alone. The siege was broken. The Ottoman advance was finished forever. Never again would the crescent banners threaten the heart of Europe. The tide of history, which had seemed unstoppable, had been turned back by 3,000 cavalry and the will of one king who refused to accept the inevitable. In the days after the battle, the full scale of what had been accomplished became clear. The Ottoman camp was a treasure trove. Kara Mustafa had brought the wealth of an empire to purchase victory. Now it belonged to the victors. Gold and silk, jewels and manuscripts, weapons of legendary quality, cannon that would be melted down and recast for European armies. But more valuable than any physical treasure was the knowledge found in Mustafa's abandoned tent. Maps showing the entire Ottoman plan for conquering Europe, intelligence about troop strengths and supply lines and political alliances. Europe now knew everything the Sultan had planned and could prepare accordingly. The cost of victory was not small. Polish casualties numbered in the hundreds. Germans and Austrians lost thousands more, but measured against what would have been lost if Vienna fell, measured against the millions who would have died in the subsequent conquest of Europe, the price was almost trivial. Jan Sobieski understood this. He wrote to the Pope, describing the battle and its aftermath. His letter is matter-of-fact, almost understated, as if saving civilization were simply another day's work. Kara Mustafa fled back to Ottoman territory, but he did not escape justice. The Sultan did not forgive failure on this scale. Mustafa was strangled with a silk cord on December 25, 1683, the traditional method for executing high-ranking Ottomans. His head was displayed in Constantinople as a warning to other ambitious generals. The man who had promised to conquer Europe died in disgrace, his name becoming synonymous with hubris and failure. For Vienna, the immediate aftermath was chaos of a different kind. The city had to be rebuilt. Tens of thousands had died during the siege. Disease continued to claim lives even after the Ottomans left, but Vienna survived. It rebuilt. It became stronger. The Baroque architecture that defines modern Vienna rose from the ashes of 1683, monuments to survival and defiance. For Poland, the victory at Vienna represented the high watermark of national power. Jan Sobieski returned home a hero, celebrated across Europe as the savior of Christendom, but Poland's strength was already fading. The wars against the Ottomans and the conflicts with Sweden and Russia had drained the kingdom. Within a century, Poland would be partitioned, wiped from the map by its neighbors. But in 1683, Poland stood at the peak of its glory. And at that peak, Polish cavalry rode into legend. The Winged Hussars themselves would fade as warfare changed. Gunpowder weapons made heavy cavalry increasingly obsolete. The romantic age of knights and lances gave way to the mechanical age of muskets and cannon. By the mid-18th century, the Hussars were a memory. But what a memory. For 2 centuries, they had been the finest cavalry in Europe, possibly the finest cavalry the world has ever seen, and at Vienna they proved it one final glorious time. The Battle of Vienna changed European history in ways both obvious and subtle. Obviously, it stopped Ottoman expansion. The empire would never again threaten Central Europe. The slow decline of Ottoman power began on that September afternoon. But more subtly, Vienna marked a shift in European consciousness. For centuries, Europe had seen itself as fragmented, divided by religion and politics and national interest. Vienna proved that when necessary, those divisions could be overcome, that Catholic and Protestant could fight side by side, that Pole and German and Austrian could unite against a common threat. This lesson would be forgotten and relearned many times over the following centuries, but Vienna planted the seed. The battle also demonstrated the continued relevance of courage and leadership in an age increasingly dominated by technology and numbers. Sobieski did not win because he had better weapons or more men. He won because he had the courage to attack when any rational calculation said he should wait. He won because his men trusted him enough to follow him into what looked like certain death. He won because faith and will can sometimes overcome mathematics. It is a lesson that should never be needed, but history proves it must be relearned in every generation. The charge of the Winged Hussars at Vienna stands as one of the great moments in military history, not just for its tactical brilliance or strategic importance, but for what it represents about the human spirit. 3,000 men rode down that mountain knowing they faced 80,000. They rode anyway. They rode because their king asked them to. They rode because a city was dying. They rode because some things are worth dying for, and in riding they saved a civilization. Today, more than 300 years later, the story of Vienna endures. It endures in paintings and poems and songs. The Winged Hussars have become legend, larger than life, which is fitting because what they did that day was larger than life. They proved that courage matters, that leadership matters, that faith matters, that when darkness gathers at the gates, when the odds are impossible and hope seems foolish, sometimes all it takes is one man willing to stand and others willing to follow. The thunder of the Winged Hussars rolled across history. The sound of their charge echoed down through centuries. It echoes still, in every story of courage against impossible odds, in every tale of the few standing against the many. September 12, 1683. The day 3,000 cavalry destroyed 80,000, the day Vienna was saved, the day Europe stood, the day thunder came down from the mountain and changed the world. Against all reason, against all odds, against the mathematics of war and the logic of despair, Europe stood. Because on one September day, the Polish Winged Hussars rode into legend and carried the weight of civilization on their backs. They rode knowing they might die. They rode because that was what honor demanded, and in the end, they rode into immortality. The story of that charge has been told and retold for 3 centuries. It has been exaggerated and romanticized and mythologized until separating fact from legend becomes difficult. But the core truth remains undeniable. 3,000 cavalry charged 80,000 soldiers and won. Not through magic or miracle alone, though faith played its part. They won through skill and courage and discipline, through years of training that made the impossible merely improbable, through leadership that inspired men to attempt what no rational soldier would attempt, through the simple, terrible fact that sometimes, rarely, glory and victory align. The Battle of Vienna teaches many lessons about the importance of unity in the face of existential threats, about the power of leadership and faith, about the value of military excellence and training, about the danger of arrogance and complacency. Kara Mustafa lost not because his army was weak, but because he assumed victory was inevitable. He did not look north. He did not imagine anyone would be foolish enough to challenge him. That assumption cost him everything. But perhaps the deepest lesson is about choice. Sobieski chose to march to Vienna. His hussars chose to follow. The defenders of Vienna chose to hold when holding meant starvation and death. At every point, different choices were available. Safer choices, more reasonable choices. They chose courage instead. They chose duty instead. They chose to stand instead of flee. And those choices, made by thousands of individuals acting on faith and honor, changed the course of history. This is what makes Vienna more than just another battle. It is a testament to the power of human choice in the face of overwhelming force. It proves that the outcome of history is not predetermined, that the strong do not always win, that numbers and weapons and wealth, while important, are not the only factors that matter. Courage matters, leadership matters, faith matters, will matters. And when all these align, the impossible becomes possible. The Winged Hussars of Vienna were not superhuman. They were men who bled and feared and died like any soldiers. But they were men who had trained their entire lives for war, men who believed in something larger than themselves, men who followed a king willing to die beside them, and in one afternoon, those men accomplished what history said could not be accomplished. They broke an army 3 times their size. They saved a city. They turned back an invasion. They preserved a civilization. And they did it with nothing more than horses and lances and absolute unshakable courage. 3 centuries later, the charge down Kahlenberg remains one of the greatest cavalry actions in military history. Military historians study it, trying to understand how such a thing was possible. Artists paint it, trying to capture the glory of that moment. Writers tell it, trying to convey the drama and the stakes. But perhaps the story endures not because of the tactics or the drama, but because of what it says about humanity. That when everything seems lost, when darkness gathers and hope fades, sometimes all it takes is one man willing to stand, and others willing to follow, and the thunder of hooves carrying them toward glory or death, content either way because they have done what honor demanded. This is the legacy of September 12th, 1683, the day the Winged Hussars charged, the day Vienna stood, the day Europe was saved, the day that proved courage and faith can change the world. The thunder of that charge echoes still, waiting for the next moment when impossible odds demand impossible courage, waiting for the next generation that must choose between safety and duty, waiting to remind us that the outcome of history is written not by the inevitable, but by those brave enough to challenge it. The Winged Hussars understood something fundamental about the human condition, that life without honor is merely existence, that safety purchased at the cost of principle is no safety at all, that some things are worth more than survival. They rode to Vienna not because victory was certain, but because the fight was necessary. Not because they did not fear death, but because they feared dishonor more. Not because they were guaranteed glory, but because they were demanded by duty. In the centuries since, the world has changed beyond recognition. The weapons of war have evolved from lance and saber to technologies the Hussars could never have imagined. The nature of conflict has transformed. The maps have been redrawn. Empires have risen and fallen. But the fundamental truth that Vienna represents remains unchanged. That courage matters. That leadership matters. That when civilization stands at the precipice, it is not saved by committees or calculations, but by individuals willing to pay the price that virtue demands. The charge down Kahlenberg was not just a military maneuver. It was a statement about human nature, about the capacity for sacrifice, about the power of faith to move mountains and men, about the reality that sometimes, against all mathematical probability, the righteous cause prevails not because it is stronger, but because those who fight for it refuse to accept defeat. The Hussars proved that day that the human spirit, properly directed and courageously expressed, can accomplish what logic says is impossible. This is why the story endures. This is why it will continue to endure as long as people tell stories of courage and sacrifice, because Vienna reminds us that we are not prisoners of circumstance, that the strong do not always triumph, that numbers and resources, while important, are not destiny, that faith and courage and leadership can change the course of history.